you know, I don't know if a lot of this stuff is real. I don't know what's going on out there, but I wanted to tap into some of you guys' opinion on what do you think's happening now. Is it a COVID thing? Is it, is this a long time coming because of other things that are going on? Rob, I didn't realize there was a thing with baseball and what you put on the ball. And the pitchers are complaining now that they got to grip it harder and they're getting injuries. So maybe Jim could comment on that. I didn't know there was like I thought you couldn't put anything on the ball, but anyways, we'll get into that as well. But certainly, we've got sports science, we've got load management, we've got force plates, we've got all these different things, we've got new physical therapy techniques that you can have magic with, but injuries are about the same or worse. So what the heck is going on here? Is performance just getting so amazing that as as injury mitigation goes up, then performance goes up, and then we just keep having this balance of injuries versus health? I don't know. So we're going to start with let's start with Jim. Jim, let's talk about baseball, because I'm not as adept at the baseball world, but certainly hamstrings, other things are popping left and right. And is this atypical?
I mean, it's hard to say. The baseball world, the Twitterverse in baseball is, obviously there are a lot of, like elbows and assholes. Everybody's got an opinion. You know, 20 years ago, it was, pitching coaches complaining about what's with the lifting and the sprinting. All we used to do was go out and run 3 to 5 miles and we were fine, right? Then it became probably a little bit of mix, as more of us got involved. And then now, you have a sector out there that says, well, metabolically there's no point. You don't have to run poles, you don't have to run intervals, all you should be doing is sprinting. And you even think about what the Yankees went through, not now, although they're certainly not, their roster's not in great shape, but when a guy named Marty Miller got hired to be the strength coach, they talked about those guys weren't doing like any running. And then 2 months into the season, they had a dozen hamstring issues. Rob's a New York guy, so Rob probably remembers this. And then all of a sudden, they let that guy go. And, Dana Cavalier became the strength coach and had his run there. I've always been of the opinion that you need a little bit of everything, I think, to build a more, robust athlete. People talk, I saw a comment the other day, be a Ferrari on the mound. Well, you can't drive a Ferrari down a bumpy street. So, and environmentally, conditions aren't always going to be so perfect that you can just be this finely tuned I'll say one dimensional athlete, even though we know that's not the case. But, I personally, I do see value in interval running. I don't see a value going out and running 2 miles, but if I can have a guy run, 12 to 14 200-yard poles in interval fashion at, 1.5 or 2-to-1 rest to work ratio, then I think there is value in that. Just like anything, it's where does it fit in the program, in the short term and the long term, but, you know, ground-based running activity, if we're talking about lower half, adaptation and preparation, yeah, I think is important. I think it's important for layers of energy system development. You start getting into the shoulder and the elbow stuff. I am really of the opinion that we're just seeing a byproduct of too much throwing when they're younger. Because you can't unravel that. You can't go back. You can't fix that. I've got a cousin who's coaching little league baseball out in California, who I hear from regularly, and he's like, I should I be reporting a coach that has his 12-year-olds throwing curveballs? So I don't know. I don't know what your league rules are. I said, but here's the pitch smart recommendations from MLB and Dr. Andrews. In which case, yeah, they should be throwing curveballs at that point. I think it's just mileage. Old timers used to joke about, well, they got so many bullets in the gun. And when you've got, in a sport like baseball, when you've got showcases and travel ball and all these things going on, and even in the cold weather states, a lot of throwing and a lot of pitching and getting on mounds and academies and off-season throwing. I think it's too much, and they're paying the price for it when they get older. And there's probably some more immediate things to that, but I personally think that it's, from what I've seen since in the 20, I got in baseball in 1997, as I've seen that change and what we're getting, the kids that we're getting now, they're less well-rounded, they're less robust, and they've got a lot of mileage on their arms already. So, and I think if you hear Dr. Andrews talk about kids at 16 and 17 having their second Tommy John surgery, I think it's hard to argue that.
From a staffing point of view, Jim, do you think there's things that teams can do to mitigate some of this stuff that maybe they're not doing?
I Derek, I don't know. I think they're trying to do as much as they can. Um, Obviously, so look, we've seen a big shift in the philosophy of baseball, pitching and hitting wise. Is that contributing to it? Spin rate and velocity, and chasing numbers. And it's without being the old man yelling at clouds, it's hard to say, because I think that a lot of the nuance of the game is lost. I don't think, I'll jump on that bandwagon, especially since I'm not affiliated with anybody right now. It's not really the same game. And I think, of course, younger people will argue that, well, the guys playing 20 years ago couldn't play right now. And I would argue against that, because, it's the kind of sport where skill plays, whether you're 19 years old or 39 years old. If you're the best, you're the best. Some of the metrics that are being measured now are a little bit different, but it's so skill specific that you can't fit a particular somatotype into any one position, because we've seen them all in all 9 positions, and we've seen guys be successful with numerous body types and different sort of off the field physical abilities and strengths and weaknesses. It's just it's so particular that it's hard to say. And I don't think we certainly haven't found the perfect body type to say that this body type gets injured less than the next one. I think that, just like anything else, I think, people have expiration dates on what they can do. The flame burns bright, and it only burns so long. I think we can find examples of that across the board.
Yeah, that's a really good concept. This finite capacity of a tendon or a muscle or a Rob, do you have thoughts on that? Like Bob just jumped on. We're talking sort of baseball here, Bob, but
Okay.
Jim opened up. But I'll get Rob to jump in, then we'll get your thoughts, Bob.
Okay.
I just think it's so multifactorial. And Jim, I don't know if you heard the Michael Jordan quote lately. He was asked if his Bull teams from the 90s could beat the present day Lakers, and he said yes by 2 or 3 points. And when asked why only 2 or 3 points, he said, well, we're all approaching.
We're 60. I saw that. Yeah.
So yeah, I just think it's multifactorial. You've got turf versus natural grass, and so you're going to have collisions at higher velocities. You're going to have injuries. Interesting enough, just this week, in our company, we have a number of high school. I think my point to this next statement is COVID and inability to train for a while. We have a number of high schools that we take care of, and those athletes get injured. We don't get everyone, but hopefully, we get some of them to rehab. And in a typical year, we'll get, give or take, 400 athletes from the number of high schools we cover. From January 1 to May 31st of this year, we've gotten 321. So we usually get 400 a year, and in 5 months we got 321. So, I've always been a believer that even in the good times, years ago before COVID, I don't think as many people prepare to train as they should. They just jump into training. And I just think it's multifactorial. It's like Jim said, if you picked your parents well or you didn't, you're playing on turf, you're playing on grass. I remember there's an orthopedic surgeon that once told me, if you have great pitching mechanics, eventually you'll blow out your cuff. If you're on your elbow, if you don't have great pitching mechanics, you'll blow out your cuff. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. I've had, in my worst injury, it's a shame, I've had a kid that had to have an elbow scope at age 11 to remove bone chips because he's playing baseball 4 days a week and tennis the other 3. And that's due to parents versus more than the kids. So at the younger age group, you have the parents involved, or the parents or the sports coach telling you how to train their athlete, though they've come to you to train them. It's just so multifactorial. I don't know if we could put a finger on it. I do believe, though, that COVID has had an effect. I don't think people, not that they greatly prepare in the past, meaning prepare to train and then train, but there are limitations of COVID and the condensed seasons, how one followed another, in briefer periods of time. I don't think you can ignore that. I don't think you can ignore the effect on the body and the recovery of the body.
Yeah, we were talking about yesterday, like rule changes, and obviously the NFL is looking at changing the kickoff and other things. But you had mentioned, I hadn't heard this about baseball, where they changed, like, guys were putting stuff on the ball, pitchers were putting stuff on the ball.
Yeah.
What was the impact there?
And Sam would know better than me. I just heard that with prohibiting putting substance on the ball so that there was a better grip on the ball. Now that you remove the substance, I think it was the pitcher for the Rays who partially tore his ulnar collateral ligament, said that he had to change certain aspects of his pitching mechanics, and they had to grip the ball harder because now you didn't have this substance assisting you, and gripping the ball harder causes the muscles to work more, and the snowball's going downhill. Whether it's true or not, who knows? And LeBron James, he came out, had a statement that I told you if you start the season so early, we are going to have injuries. And, was LeBron right? Or, NBA says no, LeBron says yes. So it's just so multifactorial, but I definitely think COVID had something to do with it because of the prohibitive ability to train for a period of time and play.
Yeah. Yeah. And just all the stress around whatever protocols and whatever. Bob, what are your thoughts on the baseball injury situation currently? There seems to be a lot of talk about, hey, this is worse than I've ever seen it. Is it any different in your opinion?
Well, I mean, if the statistics are accurate, yes. Yeah, it's definitely worse than it's ever been. I talked to Joel Wolf, who was Giambi's agent, who I coached at UCLA, who ended up being in the A's organization. He works out of Arntellem's office. Pretty tried and true ball player and thing. And I asked him because I wanted to get a hold of Tony Clark. Like I was telling Jim the other day, I want to make sure I sent Tony a message. So I did, just said, hey, I'd like to help if I can. I mean, I just look at everything here now. But I did say in there, as Jim would say and Rob would say, and look, I don't have a solution because I'm not there. But if I read everything and I hear about it, I think there may be something I can, I certainly have an opinion, but I'm interested in what you're hearing, Tony, from the players. Joel said what Rob was talking about, like they went from that short season into a full one. They hurried into one season and had less time to get to the next season, and they're just unprepared. But Joel was saying that he thought that the teams were doing a pretty good job of measuring load. And I thought to myself, measuring load or sensitive to load, as in backing off so far that now you're undertrained, right? So and Joel was saying, I haven't heard anything from the players. He said he felt like the teams were doing a good job. Because I said, what, you hearing any one thing? He said, no, not at all. I said, do you think it's all COVID related? He said, I don't think it all is, but it's a heavily influenced issue in that area. And I think guys went home just like collegiately and everywhere else. And just now they're left to their own devices and they're just not as self-disciplined as we think they are or they thought they are, and just showed up, and no matter when you show up, that game is asking you for a certain physiological requirement to be successful. Not, hey, where are you at in your physiology? And then we'll adjust the game. The game says, here's what you need to do. Doesn't matter who you are, tall, short, flat, fat, doesn't matter. And you're going to have to do it. And in some instances, it's going to be, you're going to have to do it or you're not getting paid. And so all of a sudden they just put themselves out there, right? So the teams are kind of at it, how do I back this guy off or how do I prepare him? And we're playing in the shortened season. It's quite the conundrum, but I think I don't think there's a solution to alleviate it, but there's got to be a way to make it better. I mean, because the numbers are just ridiculous. Like the hamstring thing alone is like that. I mean, I had 60 kids that we literally sprinted in some form or fashion every single day for a whole semester. And I had one guy who had to sit out for like 4 days because he thought his hamstrings were sore but not pulled. So, I mean, it's not, there's a solution there. But again, I'm not there. And I think the guys who are smart enough can say, I got, well, obviously they're not doing the Nordic board. Like, yeah, right. It's not that, that's for sure.
But this load management thing, do you think it is part of the problem where like, hey, let's back people off? Like the guy from the Clippers who was the load management poster boy is out, even though they still won. But somebody texted me who was with one of the NBA teams. He's a strength coach and he's moving on to college, and he said, "Oh, thank God I'm out of that. Like it's going in the wrong direction in the NBA here. It's everything is functional and there's no load, there's no intensity." I'm interested to get your opinion on that. Is load management a problem and not a solution?
Well, when I was writing the letter to Tony, I was thinking to myself about load management, right? Well, first of all, there's no stable league protocol for load management. Not everybody has catapult. Not everybody does Hawkins. Not everybody does jump testing. So, you'd have to figure out, some statistical genius would have to figure out how to link all that together. That's a problem. I think the other part is, of the variables, Rob mentioned some, I'm sure Jim must have mentioned some too, but of the variables, and I tried to put it in there the best way I could. I mean, I know Tony and he knows me, but I said, there's folks in the game that perhaps don't have a full understanding of the game and therefore can't analyze or come to a conclusion as well as maybe somebody who understands the game has been in it. I think that's a big part of it. And those statistical analysis and all that crap is, I say crap, but I like it. I'm just saying that all of that group is being oversaw by people who don't know what that means. So, you could have somebody who's really good and it's useless because the person above them doesn't know. You can have somebody up here who's really good, but hired somebody who doesn't know. I think unqualifications might be part of the problem. Not every team, but like, when I was talking to, who the hell was I talking to? Rick Slade about this. He said, it's obviously not a team driven metric. It's not like you can point to the most injured team in the league and say, well, that's skewing the data. It's everybody. So it's that would lend me to think, I'm pushing towards that COVID thing. Now, we didn't see it collegiately. At our school, we didn't see it, but I could see professionally when there's much more on the line. And, that the simple idea that if you don't perform, we move somebody in who is, well, in a shortened season, you don't have much time to let somebody, get 100 at bats before you say that's enough. You might only get 10, so everybody's pushing to be the guy. So I think that's a contributor. The NFL, I just read an NFL study on the number of injuries this year. Hold on. Sounds like my son's awake. That I wish I should have brought that up here, but it talked about this is the highest injury rate than the last 3 seasons. And, the only commonality that you would kind of draw from that is the COVID thing, right? Unprepared, they're on their own. And that's a league that's also taken the players out of the strength coach's hands a little bit more too. So that doesn't help.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at an article recently about the 49ers about being the most they had a couple of injuries in OTAs. And so prompted like, well, what's the head coach doing in practice? Because they've had the highest injury rate the last couple of years in the NFL. And that's what they're looking at is how do you run practice? How many padded practices? What's the intensity in practice? And I don't know if that's necessarily measured by whatever load gathering metrics that they're looking at. But yeah, I mean, there's so many variables, as Rob said. Ken, you're not necessarily with a team, but you have athletes going to different organizations and teams. How are you, where do you see this from? Like in terms of like advising athletes and making sure that they're ready despite what maybe the team's doing?
Despite, you kind of set it up right there, right? What do I think? So here's where we're sitting looking, or at least where I am. everybody said it, it's multifactorial. There's more than one thing. So I think this is a reflection of a lot of those things. I think it was Rob or Jim mentioned, like, there's also the effect of the youth development side, right? Is this exacerbating things that have been long growing trends? So we got trends of what's going on with youth development. We have trends of different types of preparation, I'll put it at best. We definitely have early specialization. And then we went into COVID, or coming out of COVID. And like a lot of things in the business world, in the social world, COVID sped up a lot of coming changes that were already there. And so that's kind of where I'm looking at the overall piece of it. As for how we're talking to individual players, what we're seeing across different teams and different sports is we still have people chasing magic bullets. It's one of my biggest concerns. So we have players going back to teams where they know they're going to have to get on a certain force plate, and they're going to have a number or metric that's going to be really impactful. Another one's going to go on a different machine or a different board, and they're going to have a number there that's impactful. Personally, none of these things are bad. I think there's a lot of value in all of them, but we have so many teams, organizations, coaches, training staff trying to pursue a single metric for injury. And I think that becomes this spiral that even might be making it worse, because instead of worrying about developing the athlete or taking care of all these factors, they're going down a path. So Derek, you said, like, what are we telling players? We're saying, great, if your job, if your money, if things are on the line with your organization to hit a metric on certain tests, our job right now is to help you get ready for that. If you're with us in the off season, that's my job, right? Take care of you, help you keep your job. And in the meantime, let's actually take care of what matters. So the biggest thing that we're finding we have to run into sometimes is we have to try to balance out guys that have become obsessed with one thing. And again, lots of good things, whether it's Nord boards or it's now we're going certain load explode profiles, or we're going whatever it is. Everybody's chasing bullets, and I mean, everybody said it, this is complex, but nobody wants to deal with complex. Only really good organizations with a philosophy, a long-term view, like, they can deal with complex, because I mean, yeah, this is way too tough. Interestingly, I'll share too, you know, since Clint brought it up earlier and he's in Beijing, the years we spent in China with a lot of staff there and all the Olympics, it was a really interesting case study in everything we're talking about. So we're talking about things becoming highly specialized early here in the US, and is it having long-term effects? They've been doing that for decades and decades in a place like China. They've specialized their training, depending on the sport, anywhere between 8 and 13 years old. It is highly sports specific. They've wanted to do everything sports specific. And one of the reasons why there's foreigners there now, and some people realize, is it was failing. It produced really good performers. Okay, they're having results in performance, but they had fragile athletes. They were burning through their athletes with injury, and they had no resiliency, they had no adaptability. So when we first started going back there in like 2012, 13, it was really easy to see a real life case study of a whole country, a whole sports system doing the stuff we're talking about. So it has an effect, and it's a fair chance that's part of the whole equation there.
Yeah, Clint, did you want to add to that based on what you've seen and you know, your experience with, is there still some early specialization and burnouts, and what are the injuries like? Is it a problem, or have they figured it out?
Holy cow. Yeah, exactly everything that Ken just said and that everyone has talked about is very interesting, and definitely everything here is very traditional training. I mean, absolutely. You know, they want two technical sessions or 2 practices a day, and then 1 or 2 dryland or you know, weightlifting sessions per day, every day, 5 days a week. You know, I think in a lot of ways they want to mimic almost the school system where they are in class almost at 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 at night. I swear from the age of 2 or 3 years old, they want their kids in school. So it's really interesting to hear all of this, and we just had an athlete return yesterday, and he is about to go to the under 20 hockey team, and he just came back to China. So now he actually just had to clear a 3-week quarantine. And so now we just got him back onto the ice yesterday, and they want him to start training coming up for the next couple of weeks. So, and then they're going to go into the under 20 national hockey camp. And so it's really interesting. I've been looking into workload. I saw something today. It said something like, if you train an adolescent athlete over 3 hours per day, it might quadruple their chances of injury. But actually, if you go over 5 hours a day, it might actually reduce the chances of injury. It might be a protective effect. So I think it's really interesting to hear everyone talk about this stuff. So yeah, I mean, I guess I have more questions than answers than anybody. So I think it's really good conversation. So really happy to hear everyone talk about this.
Eric, I wanted to get your thoughts on what you're seeing at the youth level as well. Eric's in Vancouver, but we talk a lot about different injuries all the time. And is there anything you're seeing in, say, youth basketball or other sports where you're concerned?
Yeah, I think so. It's just as people are talking, I'm thinking about a couple clients right now. And, as Derek, we just sort of opened up a little bit here, and everyone's been so anxious to get back to some semblance of normal. And even though we're not there, one layer gets lifted and then just like, boom. So I have one client that I work with, and he's, a fairly good young athlete. Like he's, going on a path where he's going to pursue a sport as something he does, basketball particularly. And, he's been training with me for 3 years, so he's decently well trained, but he's going to play 7 basketball games in 3 days this weekend. And it's just like what? Like, where did we come up with this idea, this schedule? Who put that together? I know you've been waiting so long to do this, and it's all really exciting, but that's just like so far beyond anything that would be normal prior to this COVID year. And I think at the youth level, it's a bit like maybe even more exaggerated in some ways from what I've seen, because with the removal of games and the structure that games force upon a schedule, everyone being left to their own devices, it's been chaos from a training perspective. I think you and I talked about this a bit last year. If I go back a year ago, some of these youth basketball players I work with, their coaches didn't know what to do with them, so they were running a ton. And they would do like kilometer challenges in the week. These are like youth basketball players who are all going to go on and play like university college basketball, and they're putting in like 50 kilometer, 60 kilometer weeks running. And it's like, what are we going to do with that? Like, there's no more room for anything else. And it was just craziness. And then that just like disappeared when we're allowed to get inside a court. And now they've been training lots, and then we're going to play games. And there's just there doesn't seem to be people at that level, enough people at that level that can see the perspective of, okay, like we've been played for 18 months. Let's just like maybe trickle some things in and ramp some things back up slowly. And that's been my frustration locally here in the last like month, when, we could see that some COVID related restrictions were going to change, and games were going to competition was going to return. And, so you try to prepare people as best you can, obviously, and give them all the tools that they might need to do it, but it's still a challenge. So we'll see what each week sort of entails from here on out, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. I don't know how, I mean, we'll bounce back to Jim about just this whole sort of youth thing. How do we have things like load management and intelligent decision making trickle down to the youth level, so that we don't run into these problems, and we also make sure that parents feel like their kids are gonna progress and have a shot without overdoing it.
Yeah, well, I'm of the opinion that what's happening here, at least here in the U.S., and if we'll talk about baseball, but I think it leads into a sport like hockey, because I have friends whose kids play hockey. Is you've got a bad intersection of parents with unrealistic expectations for their kids, and you have the monetization of youth sports, and you have opportunists that are out there that in some respects are selling a bag of beans and not operating in the best interests of the kids. There's too much overlap. I mean, I've heard you've got some high school baseball coaches that are involved with travel teams, and they put pressure on the kids and the parents of those kids for their players to play on these travel teams. And there's implied sort of threat about playing time or even making the team for the school team if you're not participating in the travel team. You've got broader reaching, larger organizations out there with these showcases and playing multiple games. And, it's just every parent thinks their kid's going to get a scholarship or turn pro. And too many youth coaches manage or coach their teams like they're in, it's game 6 of the World Series, game 7 of the World Series, like it's live or die. Like, I think that the sort of purity of sport for sport's sake and some of the underlying values that we espouse about being sport participants, that is just white noise, and that's not really what's driving. Sport, used to be go and have fun with your buddies, play a game. If you were good, you were good. And if you weren't, you weren't. You had your, teams or levels of teams that you could participate on. And, there was hopefully some value being taught about, why you play sport. And then that would, Little League would lead to high school, activities, after school activities, staying busy till your parents got home from work, so you weren't a latchkey kid. Now it's everybody just thinks that, got to get a scholarship. And unfortunately, a lot of parents don't really realize maybe it's probably sadly worse for the parents that weren't good, that are trying to live vicariously through their kids and have expectations on their kids. And they kind of forget, that they have provided the most important aspect of that kid's development through what they passed along genetically. I think sometimes the higher performing coaches or higher performing athletes are probably a little more forgiving for their kid, because maybe they saw what that pressure was like, and they don't want their kids to feel like there's some sort of expectation. I think that just happens in some families regardless. I mean, I was a decent football player and a pretty good power lifter, and my younger brother was, he came to my high school 5 years later, and it was like, this is not my parents, but still, he just come into high school. It's like, oh, it's Jim Malone's brother. He's going to be, he's going to grow into being this, hulking 220 pounds 17-year-old that's, going to play football. My brother, topped out at 5'8" and change at 175 pounds, but he was pound for pound a better power lifter than I was, so he found his path there. But again, it's that intersection of unrealistic expectation and monetization.
Yeah, that monetization piece is important. And like I'm not writing checks. It looks like feels like I'm doing e-transfers for my kids now, and they go into this sport, and it worked out. I'm gonna get Ken to jump in on this to defend the entrepreneurial people, but
I don't mean, that's not a dig. I mean, I'm probably moving into the private space.
Yeah.
It's not, but it's not, again, I'm just talking about the sport. I'm not talking about our domain where, the training aspect of it. This is just, kids playing in 3 hockey leagues in the winter, and, playing summer hockey and playing on 4 teams in the summer for baseball, and basketball, year-round basketball. There's no more fall football, winter basketball, or wrestling, spring baseball or track to have these more well-rounded athletic kids. They're just, it probably parallels to what Clint said about China. I think we've all been around long enough where you hear the Chinese, they just churn them out and burn them out because their population base is so big that they cast the wide net. The best kids rise to the top. They're hot for a couple of years. It's not, there are very few Lu Xiaojings out there that are still competing in the Olympics at 35 years old for weightlifting. But, everybody else is, one Olympic cycle and done because they're fried. Or the next best kid came up at 19 years old and displaced them.
Yeah, we're having that same problem with our hockey players here. I'll tell you that much. The kids can't catch. So, sometimes I look at the parents, I'm like, well, maybe that DNA didn't get passed on so well. So I'm going to mute myself here,
but yeah, like the one thing I've noticed is that when I was a kid, I think, you paid something, right? But most of your coaches were volunteers or other parents and all that. But now we've gotten to this professionalization or monetization, as Jim has said, and we're paying, like, I think it worked out to maybe about 25 to 30 bucks an hour to put my kid in something now, which is a lot. But I haven't noticed, like, I thought, being like you, Jim, and like Ken and Rob and Bob, like, okay, I'm paying for it now. It's going to be better. But it isn't necessarily better. Like, there's a lot of
you used
shit
to have
out
to
there.
sell raffle tickets. It wasn't even, you didn't even pay anything.
Yeah,
you got your jersey and you had
bingo,
your book of 20 raffle
bingo.
tickets at $2 a ticket, and you had to go bug your neighbors or your aunt and uncle, or eventually your mom and dad ended up buying about 3/4 of tickets because you couldn't sell any.
But this professionalization or monetization hasn't led to better coaching, Ken. What's going on?
Well, you said I have.
You got to represent everyone now.
No. First of all, I can't defend a lot of it. There's all kinds of crap. Let's start there. It's no different. So our business, right, came along back when Lauren started 20 plus years ago. And to be fair, back then, a lot of athletes that did want to get better didn't have access to this stuff. Okay, that's fine. There's kids that want to be proactive. There's kids that do want to take care of themselves. Great. But I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this. There's a whole lot of kids that want to come in and train, and that's probably not a great thing, in all honesty. So even as a business, in all honesty, we have to look at where things go. Where are the people that we need to just really build resilient humans under the guise of athletics and sports performance? But in all honesty, we just need to build better humans, make them physically better, mentally, like do what we can do. Here's the kids that are pursuing performance. How do we help them do it? And again, in that case, we have to deal with the same things, right? In the sport culture, they have to go play that much. And there are the over-the-top parents, and we have different profiles for our parent clients. And we have our pro parent who looks at their kid as being better than everybody else. They're going to manage their career. They know they have outstanding talent. But it's not all bad motivation. And I know I had to go through this, that like, look, these parents that are putting their kids in things, they're not all evil. They all want something good for their kids. They actually need education. So I think you asked Eric, what do we do with this, or how do I defend it? We have to educate. We have to help teach parents why this other stuff matters. In all honesty, this stuff back here, I'm sitting in one of our places today, it has to become the second sport because they can't fit in a second sport. I went through this with my kids playing their sports. They wanted to play more sports. I wanted to put them in sports. And you're going to run quickly into that conflict of, well, then you're going to miss out on this team, or you're going to be left behind here. And it's scary if you're a parent that doesn't know. It's scary enough if you're a parent that knows. Be a parent that doesn't know, and you're like, well, you don't want to do something to hurt your kids. So most people's intentions aren't ill, right? They're trying to do it. So we have to guide. What I tell our centers and our places is, look, you have to take the lead. Coaching is not about what you're doing training the athletes. This goes a lot further, and you got to educate parents. You got to educate sports teams and leagues. And I mean, I guess to circle this back up, I mean, we're kind of around, but why are there all these injuries at the top? Yeah, I suspect we need somebody to really dig in and help us prove this. There's little data, but early specialization, less robust athletes in different ways is hurting us at the pro level. We just had a pandemic, we shut things down, we exacerbated competition, more games, faster throwing velocity. It starts at the bottom. So if somebody's going to help really change this, League's got to look out for themselves and decide that, well, if we keep burning out kids, if kids quit playing baseball by age 10 and 11 because they're burnt out and hurt, maybe they're not going to be as big of a fan. Maybe they're not going to come to the games later on. Maybe they're not going to bring their family, and it's going to hurt us as a business. And I've had this discussion with a team that's thinking that way. So how do they influence the game as well? So everything's multifactorial. What do we do with it? And our field, we have, well, there's terrible things happening on the private side of our business. It's scary. So yeah, I don't know that I can defend it, but I know there's a pathway we could be a positive influence.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Ken. But, Jim.
Well, I mean, even, tying in what Ken said and just some of the overall conversation, let's just look at what's going on in the education system, right? How many kids go outside for recess anymore? That was like automatic when I was younger, and I'm sure Rob and Bob and could attest to that, right? Phys ed, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, depending on where you went to school and what was going on. How much of that has been cut, right? Arts programs, physical education, gone. So even just the minimum effective dose of some sort of exposure to just kids running around and self-organizing and physically problem-solving stuff. I mean, run around the playground, play 4 squares, play, stickball off the side of the school, dodgeball, touch football, flag football. You don't see kids, playing fumbly wumbly out in the front yards anymore. It's just part of the overall culture shift to where that type of stuff, and that's just going down a different, obviously, philosophical rabbit hole, but, don't come home till the streetlights are on, or make sure you're home when the streetlights come on. Now kids, how many parents have to kind of shoo their kids out of the house at this point? It's just different. And so now it's either all by being involved in a sport, or it's nothing, because you're not getting phys ed and you're not getting like your time in recess, and it's, I would say, percentage wise, it's a much smaller population of kids that go out there with some sort of self-motivated incentive to just go out and do something and play outside.
Yeah,
right?
and if that's not part of the culture, I read another article about like the disappearance of the middle and lower class in sports because they can't afford it. So if you can't afford it, you're not going to get it through your regular institutions. Rob, I was thinking about, go on YouTube and I watch like old college basketball games, and I mean, I don't know what's happening now, but is there as many players doing 4 years in college, or and is that part of a development process too, physically? Like, what's a typical college season, like 30 games, 30, 40 games, and then you're going to what, 82 games in the NBA? When you were working for St. John's, like how many guys left early?
They didn't, I think part of them were afraid of Coach Conaseca, and the other part loved the game, and everybody else fell in between, but they didn't. But I just want to follow up, because I was going to say the exact same thing Jim said. And so if you put this whole thing together, let's talk about interscholastically, middle and high school. So one is, if you want to talk monetary, all right. So a lot more schools have turf fields than natural grass, because you don't have to keep replacing the natural grass, right? The band marching on it, concerts, graduation, different sports. You lay it down once and you're set. Thus, but you do have higher speed and the ability to cut at higher velocities versus grass. So higher impact, probably increase chance of injury, right? That's one. So more schools are going to turf with a deconditioned athlete. What happened in my area is the scholastic season didn't start till January 1 because of COVID. So they put fall, winter, and spring in a condensed period. So there was an overlap. I forget if it was 2 or 3 weeks, where if you had football practice, after football practice, you left that evening for basketball practice. And if you had basketball practice towards the tail end for 2 or 3 weeks, you left for the evening practice in lacrosse or baseball. Now you're coming home, you still have your studies. So what does that do for your, you're getting sleep deprivation? I don't know. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, because you got to get up and go to school the next day, plus get your schoolwork in. So are you eating right? Are you sleeping right? You're condensing these seasons. You haven't trained because of COVID. So this whole thing of the snowball's definitely going downhill. And, then you've got your private coach, right? Whether it's a hitting coach, throwing coach, strength and conditioning coach, whatever it is. And you're putting 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag, and it just doesn't work. And so you've had this all along, and now you throw COVID on top of it, and our stats are our stats, and maybe it's very limited to us, but my company has 80% of the interscholastic athletic injuries in 5 months that it usually has in a full 12 months. So what is going on? And I think it's a combination of all that. And especially for people to think that they can just condense and overlap seasons. So instead of having 2 hours of practice a day, now you have 4 hours of practice a day in 2 different sports for a 3-week period, and then a transition, and then it happens again at the end of the next season. Come on. The kid still has to go home, still has to eat, sleep, do their schoolwork. There's only enough gas in the tank.
I mean, obviously you're predominantly in rehabilitation, but your performance center, how has those numbers changed in the last year, and what have you
We
seen?
had to shut it down because of the gym restrictions with COVID, and we had to shut down some of our PT clinics because they were in Equinox gyms. But we reopened and we slowly started to come back. But as Jim mentioned, people either elected not to work because of the stimulus check, or were laid off because of COVID and the reduction in business, and whatever, or everything in between. So, finances were affected to pay for something privately, where at least in therapy, people have insurance. The whole thing was just a disaster. You're just trying to figure out what to do. Anything from asking for rent abatements to whatever you could do, and now things are coming back pretty well, but you're still feeling the effects of it. Like I could tell you in therapy, you still have, until recently in the state of New York, they just eliminated all restrictions, but you had, let's just say, social distancing, never mind PPE and everything else, right? So you have a limited number of people that could fit in your facility. Doctors had a limited number of people they could fit in their waiting rooms, right? So the volume just wasn't there due to restrictions. Even if everybody wanted the care, they all couldn't show up as they had previously, which obviously affects your business. And the same thing would happen with, a performance center and so on. A performance center is 20,000 square feet. So that wasn't as much of a problem, but some of our facilities certainly aren't 20,000 square feet. And so, it was just, it was a great experience because I learned a lot, but
You don't want to go through that again.
if it's possible, I'm grayer grayer now than I was before COVID. So,
Bob, I did read that the Lakers are getting rid of their head trainer because of the injuries, and obviously it's a head trainer's fault. But what would you tell like a general manager of a pro team, if they're going through injury problems? Like, now that we've gone through this entire discussion here, and it could be youth sport, it could be this, it could be COVID. Like, how are you advising a general manager on how to solve this issue?
Geez, I could let Jim say that, and he would probably tell you verbatim what I've told him 1.5 million fucking times. But first of all, I'd say the first thing is I'm in charge. There is no second thing. So I'm going in not as the general manager. I'm telling him I'm the assistant general manager. What I say comes from your mouth. That's the only way the high performance model works. It doesn't work as otherwise. You just become the same old athletic trainer, therapist, strength coach, and what you end up saying is just a suggestion. Kind of like NCAA men's basketball rules. It's kind of a suggestion, but you do whatever you want, Crazy, right? So that's number one. And then, number two, you get somebody qualified like many on this call and say, all right, so now I'm going to take care of all the other aspects so I can limit the variables that we've just all talked about and start working, from a pretty solid, tried and true knowledge base of how all of this happens. And of course, now we're we're lucky, you know, it's not a burden that there's more statistics. I shouldn't say more statistics, a better analyzed set of data. So that's good. And now we can go from there, right? And then head into what's necessary. If I look at baseball, like I said it to Tony, we've talked about it before, that I don't think that there's, how should I say it? I'll say it in reverse. There's not enough people who understand the game in the game still, from the top to the bottom, right? From the top to the bottom. And they are going to perpetuate that until it's going to have to autocorrect itself when it's just a mess. And when you look at it, I haven't talked to one former player, and I'm not talking about, you know, I'm not talking about Whitey Ford, you know, I'm talking about guys who played just 10 years ago saying, I can't watch a game, you know, so that part's changed, and everything around it perhaps has. Now let's just subtract COVID out of the deal. I found that study here, and to Rob's case, you know, the one instance that they had statistically was in the first 4 weeks of regular season, when the preseason was canceled, they had 582 injuries documented, right? In the first 8 weeks of the 2016 season, right, when they had a preseason, there was 712. So, you know, in 4 weeks, there was only about 100 some odd incidences difference in a 4-week situation. So, I mean, you know, it's a shortened, unprepared season. The money was on the line, and they were forced to go. You know, hopefully we'll never go back at this again, but I can say I wouldn't do it differently. I had the right people behind me managing this thing, but with COVID, you had to come back and train differently. You just had to. Like, I wasn't pushing my kids any farther. I made sure everybody knew. And so, we only have a game. You know, we have a game pretty soon. We're supposed to be scheduled to play. And I would just tell them, I don't care. And so, because I don't care, you're not going to care. You know, if we have to cancel that game because our staff and I feel like these kids aren't physically prepared, then we cancel the game. And I'll speak about this at the NSCA conference, saying that the number one factor through COVID was health and safety. There was no wins and losses. There was no, well, maybe we shouldn't do the 300-yard shuttle. Like, that was stupid. That was totally ignorant. We're going to come in and assess as soon as we can, an assessment that makes sense, and take them to a spot. Everybody here should know that you can't hasten the preparatory period. You just can't speed it up. It's something that has to boil at the right pace at the right time. And unfortunately, professionally, they weren't able to do that because there was contracts on the line, TV contracts, personal contracts, all that. So they, you know, there was money and that's why, you know, basketball pushed as hard as they could to come back, and football pushed as hard as they could to come back, both collegiately and professionally, because there was money. They needed to get to the playoffs. They needed to have that playoff contract kicked in. So that would have been because I did it and was supported by it if it was a COVID situation. Now we're coming out of it now. And one of the things I told my staff was, we have to prepare to come out of this too, not just go into it, but to come out of it. It's going to be different again, closer to what we're used to, but not exactly the same, right? It's not, there's a few things that are different. You know, I found during COVID, there was lots of things that were still the same. Like being sensitive to kids that haven't been on campus. That's been that way at the mid-major and Division II level forever. You know, so if you all of a sudden you're shocked, what do I do now? These kids have been gone for so long. They've been doing that anyway. So, you know, like if you're doing something different there, you're making a mistake. But that, I mean, look, COVID or non-COVID, Derek, and even you and I have talked about it too. There's got to be somebody in place, again, like folks on this call, that can say, this is what we need to do. We need to take all of this stuff that we're involved with, nutrition, sports psychology, athletic training, massage, physical therapy, sports psychiatry, out of the sport coach's hand, all of it. They can discuss it, but they have no say. It's going to go right to the person that has the subject matter expertise. And if we have the right people in place, then we shouldn't see an extraordinary injury situation.
Yeah,
So Bob, let me ask you a question. An uninjured athlete shows up to spring training, right? And they
uninjured, you said?
An uninjured athlete, uninjured, shows up ready to go at spring training, but they don't meet the standards of the load management. They're not going to stop them from practicing. What do they do? What's the team going to do? Like if they're
Yeah, well, I mean, again, at the pro level, you have that other influence, right? The game, we're still playing on April 1st. So whatever you got to do to get them ready. And in the end, you know, and I had this with Billy being in the A's. I was able to tell him blatantly and frankly, this is what's going to happen if you play this person under the injury, under his rest, because he didn't rehab long enough. That's my job to tell you that. Now, the rest is up to you. But at least I don't have to sit there and get called back into the office. Jim's been there. I've been there. And it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable even when you're right. I mean, you know what I mean? Every time something happens on the field, you just kind of, you know, you get that little hum up the back of your neck. And then you start saying, did I write it down? How was his training and all that? And in the end, you know, when you're old and have to wear glasses to read, then you feel like, okay, no, I'm good. You know, I can have that conversation. But you're right in that instance. But collegiately back here, I was able to say, we're not doing that. You know, well, what about we cancel preseason games? No, we're not having preseason games. Well, how are we going to get prepared? Like, I don't give a shit. We're not going to sacrifice the health and safety of these kids during oh, by the way, worldwide pandemic. So no, right? And the stakes were different. The athletic director said the same thing. Like, for all you coaches out there, you know, I hope you know that your one-loss record is no measure of your success this year. It is health and safety, period. But you're right. I can't dismiss. I mean, you think I would grow hair if I was to tell you that, you know, oh, playing games with money, oh, that doesn't make a difference. Yeah, of course it does. You know, but I mean, I think you have to have. I mean, now we're getting into my whole rant on, you know, the high performance model and all that stuff. But you have to have those difficult and honest conversations just so it gets there, you know, like, okay, well.
Yeah, we need the Ken Vick and Clint Hazen model of death to democracy, and let's just do it the way it should be done, right? So, Jim, do you want to?
There's parts of that model I think are really good.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm with Bob. Look,
I mean, I think Jim.
Seriously, Bob's on it, right? Like this goes back to the whole piece. So we talked about the beginning. There's a lot of stuff going on, but if you don't have a culture and a team, and when I say those pieces, I mean the high performance team, the whole organization. Just what Bob's saying. If you got people chasing random things, or you got people that don't know what they're talking about, look, whatever's going on in the sport with youth and everything else, when they get to the pro level, let's deal with it. That's what we got to do. That's our job. Deal with reality. And we have too many people chasing magic bullets. We have too many people in silos and too many people that don't know. So now they're taking whatever factors we're talking about, and it's just worse when you got that kind of situation. So I'm with Bob.
Well, and I think too, listen, Rob and Jim will say, and I don't know what kind of backing Eric and Clint have, but I can say that, you know, the only reason I was really successful and confident is because the guys above me were. You know, Billy Bean put a high premium on who I was on the ball club. Sandy Alderson did the same. Tony La Russa did the same. And here my athletic director, Mike he does that too, you know, which, you know, he you know, gave me the COVID thing. So I was the COVID coordinator to campus and to athletics. He said, this is health and safety. This is exactly what this is here for, you know, not just, you know, coaches who are running players, you know, out in the middle of the heat or, you know, improper treatments and bad training. But, you know, my I shouldn't say braggadocio, but my overly confident oration or, you know, oratory presentation comes from my boss. And everybody knows that, you know, we don't need to call the athletic director and say, you know, I know Bob Alejo said this, but we want it. They don't even know. They know that's not going to happen. So again, you know, and we've all been exposed to others who say like, you know, I can't, you know, my general manager, my athletic director, whoever's overseeing, I can't really do that because that's not what they want. So in part, I was able to do that. That's the only real flaw in the high performance model is who's above that person.
Yeah, well, it's like the early days of COVID when you saw in China they were taking people who they suspected with COVID and throwing them into vans and like you're forced quarantine. We'll do that with like vertical jump. We'll find all the best vertical jumps, throw them in a van, and take them to a training center for Clint. Jim, what are your final thoughts, like closing out here after hearing what everybody had to say? Like, again, if you're advising a team and saying, okay, how are we going to get this injury situation under control? How are we going to manage it better in the future? What are the lessons learned from COVID? What are some of the things that you would pass on?
Well, I'll piggyback what Bob was just talking about. I think you have to have the confidence or the balls to have honest and hard conversations with the people that you answer to. So that, if you have been hired to oversee a particular domain within an organization, that you are also empowered to make the best decisions possible and try to put those things into play, into practice. And then if you're not, like Bob said, then at least you're on record. And in the long run, you're probably either going to get pushed out, or you're going to also look for somewhere else where you feel you're more appropriately valued and heard. So, and that's not easy professionally. Look, I'll maintain, and Bob knows this, and I know Rob a little bit, and now Derek, you get to know me. Look, I will speak my mind to my own detriment sometimes. If I had 2 kids, 3 kids, and all, other global things that I had to be responsible for, I'm quite sure that I would have learned to put sugar on the shit sandwich that I had to take bites out of, but I've been more inclined to speak my mind so that at least at the end of the day, I feel good about what I said. As far as trying to put myself in the best position to succeed. And therefore, hopefully as a byproduct of that, put my athletes in the best position to be successful from a performance enhancement standpoint, but also, an injury prevention standpoint. And then lastly, I would say, in the end, no matter what, when we look to go places and we punch in a destination on our phone, we can either choose to follow what Siri's telling us to do, or we can say, you know what, I know better, I'll just do it myself. And that's really who the athletes are. We can provide them with a program, we can provide them with direction, we can provide them with advice, we can provide them with resources. And it's incumbent upon us to try to build trust with those athletes and to educate those athletes. But in the end, free will, right? They can choose to do, or they can choose not to do, or they can choose somewhere in the middle. And they're, then, that's part of the shared responsibility that these athletes that are being hurt, is it because they're being misdirected or they're not following directions? So, again, and it just goes, Rob said, multifaceted, multi-layer. I think we've painted a pretty thorough picture, sort of, in its entirety. We've talked about kids, we've talked about the influence of education, we've added COVID as sort of this, extra throw in that, if we were having this Zoom 2 years ago, I think that 95% of what we talked about would still be relevant and valuable. COVID is just something new that we've had to sort of add as an extra, mystery ingredient to the big picture. But, it was going this way for a long time. And it's a tough place to be when you're on the hook for the actions or inaction of people that, are in your care, but you are not, it's going to be dependent on what's the accountability factor and how are they held accountable and how are they, judged and graded on sort of the participation. Because you can have the best program in the world. We talk, again, I think a lot of us have talked about it. If you're willing to share sort of what you do, that's great, because we're all going to put our own twist onto. If we all shared the same sheet of paper for a 6-week program, we're all going to coach it differently. We're all going to communicate it differently. And that doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong. It just makes it who we are and sort of, what our growth experiences have led us to at this point, as far as communicating with those athletes. Then, it's up to the athlete to, even if they're hitting their sets, reps, and numbers, are they really giving it their best effort? Are they holding something back, or are they maxed out? It's complicated.
That's a great interview question, where you say like, hey, you're given the instructions by Google Maps or Siri on where to go, but there's a better way. What do you do and why? Like, I'm gonna ask my teenage kids that, like, why would you not follow what you're being told?
I mean, these days, I'll be like, I grew up in Buffalo, right? I'll go home. I know, we all probably do. I know my hometown. I can get anywhere, a dozen different ways. But every now and then I'll still check, because I just want to know the fastest one. Maybe I just want to know, because maybe there's construction I don't know about, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something, and I'll just double check. Or it's like maybe, or New York City, same thing here, New York City. Even streets run east, odd streets run west, avenues north, south, this and that. But I might still take a peek, and see, maybe there's one of the subway lines I don't take that often that might get me there just a little bit faster, a little bit more convenient. So,
I'm like
or
Bob.
I could just do it the same way I've always done it.
I'm like Bob. I'll just circumvent the GPS just to get into an argument with it. Oh.
Well, yeah, like, make a left. Don't tell me what to do, Siri. I'll show you. Yeah.
It's a power trip. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining everyone on short notice. Great contributions. You guys are all way smarter than me. So, but we'll try to jump on again. This certainly keeps going into like career development and career advice. Like, for anybody who's younger and is listening to this, like, there's some good advice here. So whether you want to be a company man or whether you want to be your man. So some good stuff here.
I'll have to get you guys all to come to China. You guys can give a talk to everybody here, back me up on everything.
Yeah, Clint, I got to go there. We did exhibition games there back in 2008. It was a great 4 days.
Who's
Loved
in?
it.
Wow.
Dodgers and Padres. It was a blast just before the Olympics.
Holy cow! Wow.
That sounds great. Pick the restaurants.
We went to, Derek, we literally went to Outback.
Really?
Every day when we got back from the field, because it was right across the street from the hotel, and the beer was ice cold, and that's all that mattered at that point. Yeah. And one night we found a bar that an expat, an American-born son of Chinese immigrants, went back to Beijing, and he opened a bar there. Clint, I wish I could tell you the name of it. I have no idea.
All right, I think we're getting everyone over here. We're bringing up the gang. So
Free enterprise is alive and well in China. Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great Father's Day. Have a great weekend.
Oh, likewise. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, y'all. Happy Father's Day.
Okay.